Only a few weeks remain, and so the talk about which team is the best in the NFL finally starting to have some meaning. Of course, that also means the worst teams in the NFL have even less meaning. If you care about 32 through 21, I recommend you go check out Mike Renner's new mock draft. He'll give you some hope, potentially, or just make you more mad about the future of your franchise. Whatever it is, go check it out at profootballfocus.com. In the meantime, here's 32 through 21. They look like they look, and we're going to move on to the middle of the pack here, Eric. So 20 through 11, some teams that still have some playoff aspirations, some teams that we have liked throughout this process. Let's start with that bottom half here. Any hope for any of these teams? If so, which one?
Yeah, I think Indianapolis still really does have, the goods to make a playoff run here. I know Baltimore's kind of unexpectedly won some games in a row, which has kind of put them behind the eight ball a little bit here. But Indianapolis, I think, just kind of kind of an expected hiccup last week in Jacksonville. They still have a relatively easy schedule moving forward. Frank Reich's done a great job. Andrew Luck, aside from last week, has been good. I think that's a team to sort of look at as a contender moving forward out of this group.
It's interesting. The Carolina Panthers, who are now sitting there in 16th, just a few weeks ago we were talking about whether they should be the 5th best team in the NFL. Things have really fallen out of the bottom for them, and they sit there now in the middle of this pack here. They've really got to take control. They've got 2 more games against the Saints. And so the wild card looking a little bit bleak for them at this point. Atlanta, another team that's up there that they continue to play well enough to earn points, but just bad enough to lose every game that they play. That's a real disaster there. Philly and Minnesota in 11 and 12, teams that had legit Super Bowl aspirations, but both above the Houston Texans, who have not been stopped. Explain that a little bit.
Yeah, I think with Philadelphia and Minnesota, you're thinking about prior distributions, right? Philadelphia entered this season as the first team in our PFF ELO rating, and so it's taken a little bit for them to drop off. And every once in a while, when you want to put them in the 20s, they win a game like they did last night against a broken down Washington team. Minnesota sort of similarly, right? So every time we've wanted to write them off, they'll win a game against Green Bay. This weekend they have a game in Seattle on a Monday night, so they'll have another opportunity to move up here and sort of try to fulfill early season expectations for both. A lot of regression from what happened a season ago. Minnesota, it's defensively. With Philadelphia, it's things like 4th down efficiency. It's things like passer rating under pressure and 3rd and long that have spelled doom for that team.
It's interesting. I think maybe the question to ask is, okay, if Houston and Philly played, if it were on a neutral field, what would the spread be? If Houston and the Vikings played on neutral field, what would the spread be? And I think Houston would be favored. I think the public likes Houston enough, but it should probably be pretty darn close to a pick'em in both situations. So before you get on your high horse and start shouting and screaming about Houston being behind them, notice that these are all pretty closely packed together. The separation is more about the separation of the tiers, which brings us to the top 10 here. Dallas squeaks into the top 10. We've got Seattle in 9, Chicago in 8, the Lamar Jackson led Ravens in 7, Pittsburgh somehow still in 6, and then the Los Angeles Clippers manage to continue their Cinderella season in 5 there. Of these teams, which one would you say, okay, look, this team is there, but they're going to fall back, and maybe which team has a chance to sort of solidify themselves?
Yeah, I think Dallas is the classic one, right? They've been a team that's been on a roll over the last month or so. They're doing it with defense, which is not a sustainable thing year to year, but even month to month, it seems like we're only a month away from them losing by multiple scores at home to a Tennessee team that is one of the league's most enigmatic. So they're a team that I think if Dak continues to play poorly the way he has, you get a little bit of regression defensively. They could be a team that falls off a little bit here. If I'm looking at one of these teams to jump into the top 5, I'm looking at Chicago. Upcoming here, they got a game against the Rams. If they show well in that game, they could certainly move up in this rating system. They get Mitchell Trubisky back, which is not that big of an upgrade over Chase Daniel, but certainly one. And if you get any progression from him as a player, as we've seen over the course of the season, that could bode well for the Bears.
I'm just going to say, you based the Bears jumping up into the top 5 on the progression of Chase Daniel. We'll let that sink in a little bit. If I'm picking a team, actually, to kind of jump up here, it is the Seahawks. And the reason for that is the play of Russell Wilson. He has been absolutely amazing. A top 5 quarterback from a clean pocket. He's getting a little bit better protection this year. Tyler Lockett is really coming to his own there. That offense is worlds better than what we saw in the first couple of weeks there, which was pretty bleak, to be fair. And then I look at the Chargers. I do think the Chargers are the most complete team that is not in this top 4 here. They showed why on Sunday night, right? They were down multiple scores, and they were able to peck away at it and keep going, and they have some game changers on defense, which I think is what you want, right? The unsustainability of defense is a simple fact. You can't argue with it mathematically. So what are you looking for defensively? Looking for playmakers that can potentially make game-changing plays in a random game, because that'll win you a random game, and that is important. Bosa, Derwin James can do that.
Yeah, and we've seen that in their secondary. Both Desmond King and Derwin James are among the top 50 players in the NFL in terms of WAR, and it's not because of the play-for-play solid play. It's getting interceptions, getting sacks in the case of Derwin James, and so on and so forth. And you're absolutely right. Turnovers are the new stops in the NFL, and they have that potential.
Okay, I want to have 2 debates to close this out. Kansas City has been jumped by New England. Talk about the reasoning and whether you think that's sustainable throughout.
Yeah, I mean, Kansas City had, they won by 7 against Oakland, in Oakland. Certainly a game they have to win, but, not necessarily as impressive. Their defense has given up over 85 points in the last 2 games. So that's something I think to be weary about with respect to the Chiefs. Kareem Hunt, not really that big of a downgrade for them to Spencer Ware. Where it comes in, I think, is New England. I think New England put together a pretty complete effort against a pretty good Vikings team on Sunday. They really attacked the Vikings' weaknesses, both with Adam Thielen Stephon Diggs being hurt, and then also with the cornerbacks for the Vikings being hurt. I think New England's starting to hit their stride, and that's why we see them at 3 here.
A lot of people, speaking of weary of the Patriots continually jumping into the top 4. I think the Chiefs have a decent shot to regain their top 3 status.
Sure.
But regardless, that should be an exciting matchup if we see it in the playoffs. And the real question, of course, is who ends up with the home field, which will likely be down to the wire there, which will be exciting. Okay, the top 2, the Rams and the Saints. Last week, I banged the table. I said, look, I know the Saints are in first. I get it. I understand it. I agree with it. But by next week, by the end of the season, the Rams will take over the #1 spot. The Saints get kind of shut down in Dallas. The Rams play a very mediocre to subpar game and somehow end up winning in Detroit. Those 2 things sort of cancel each other out, and the Saints just sort of stay in #1.
Yeah, I mean, the Saints were so far ahead of everybody else in terms of pure power ranking last week. They did fall almost more than any other team in a loss to Dallas. So they are coming back towards the Rams, but the Rams simply were not very impressive against Detroit. They needed sort of like a late surge. They almost got intercepted, for a touchdown late, twice by Detroit when they were only up 3. So I don't know. I think, much like with the Chiefs, good teams win those road games against weaker teams when it's not quite as motivating of a spot. So, but it's probably not enough to vault the Rams here. Rams play the Bears in Chicago this week. If they show in that game, I do think that might be enough for them to overtake New Orleans, especially with New Orleans playing in Tampa Bay, a place that they've lost the last 2 times and lost at home against early in this season. So this, again, is another week that presents an opportunity for your Rams.
Good teams win. Great teams cover. The Rams did both. The Saints did neither. I'll just let that sit. Of course, the Rams will have to deal with the cold weather. To be seen if the forward pass still viable once the temperature drops before 40. I can barely sustain life at that point. So we'll see if McVay and company can make that happen. For more, head to ProFootballFocus.com. And, of course, subscribe to the PFF Forecast.